From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Fireworks and parades not only signal the 4th of July, they also remind us we're now halfway through 2019. In Rhode Island, Governor Gina Raimondo is taking on the monumental task of trying to fix the Providence schools, while in Massachusetts, Governor Charlie Baker is facing renewed criticism over his stewardship of the MBTA. So what can we expect next in Southern New England politics? This week on Newsmakers, 2 political roundtables break down what's in store. Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Ted Nisi, filling in for Tim White, who is off this week. I hope all of you had a very happy 4th of July and are enjoying the extended holiday weekend that many people have, but no holiday for the Rhode Island Press Corps. So we are today, first we're going to talk about Rhode Island, then we'll switch to Massachusetts. But right now, to talk Ocean State, I have 2 of the greats. Ian Donnis, he is a political reporter for the Public's Radio, and Dan McGowan, he is a reporter for the Boston Globe and their Rhode Island initiative. Thanks for being here, guys.
You bet.
So I want to start off with a big picture question. As I said, we're halfway through the year. Good time to take stock. Ian, you first. What do you think was the biggest surprise of the first half of 2019 in Rhode Island politics?
Biggest surprise for me, Ted, was Rhode Island enacting a law to ensure abortion rights. As we know, there had been an impasse for many, many years in the legislature where nothing made it to the House floor. A lot of different factors came together, particularly the election of Donald Trump and action on abortion laws in other states. So I don't think we could have necessarily seen that coming, even though House Speaker Nicholas Mattiello changed his message on that last year. But that was certainly a big surprise.
Yeah, he said on the radio with you, I think last year, before all this, that he didn't see any real rush on this issue, and a year later, a bill had passed. That's
true, but after that interview of last fall, a few months later, he did point to how, in his view, a majority of Rhode Islanders backed supporting abortion rights. So that was kind of a indicator of where things were headed on this issue.
All right, Dan, same question to you. What to you was the biggest surprise in Rhode Island politics first half of this year?
Yeah, I mean, if you come into 2019 after, tough elections in 2018, Mayor Lorza gets reelected, Governor Raimondo gets reelected, there was no talk about doing anything with Providence schools, right? We weren't talking takeover. We weren't talking about a big report that just scathing and just really assaults every part of Providence schools, every facet. And here we are. You get the superintendent to leave. You get a new commissioner in education on the statewide level, and now we are talking very seriously about a massive overhaul in the Providence schools. I think that's as no surprise that Providence schools are struggling. Of course, that's been the case forever. But the fact that folks are now taking sort of initiative, or at least appear to be, I think that's the
Let's stay on that topic, Dan, because you've covered Providence City Hall and the Providence schools for quite a few years. Of course, you used to do so for us. And you had a piece this week on the big problems facing the city, and you say it was a surprise. What do you think? What led this to suddenly switch from almost a hot potato nobody wanted to touch to something now at the center of the governor's agenda and now at the mayor's too?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing was the fact that the superintendent, Chris Marr, decided to kind of abruptly resign earlier this year. He put in for the end of the year. He was a guy who was considered someone who was fairly stable. He had his kids in the schools, was generally running a pretty good ship. When he decides to leave, the state looked at this and said, maybe we've got an opportunity. I know a lot of folks inside the Department of Education, even before Commissioner Infante Green came in, were saying this is a moment we can kind of grab this. I think the governor looked at this and said, I don't have I'm term limited. I can take a shot here. The governor's, some of her top aides are very, they very much enjoy education policy, and they've wanted to tackle this for a long time. But I think that they feel like this is a moment to be able to do it. So I think that's where it falls.
Ian, at the same time, I would say this seems politically risky for Governor Raimondo. True, as Dan says, she's in her second term. She won't face the voters for that office again. But, Providence schools, there's a reason people weren't touching it before. It's a huge problem, a difficult one to take on. I mean, do you think she's taking on a major risk here?
It is a risky thing to take on, Ted, because making serious improvement in the Providence schools, maybe the state can start on that road, but it's going to take many years. That is not an issue that's going to be accomplished during Governor Raimondo's time in office. It'll take 10, 15 years to make actual progress, if this is going to be a sustainable reform that really leads to the kind of change that everyone is seeking. And Governor Raimondo will be long gone by then, but she could be remembered as someone who put the state on the road to fixing its public schools.
I think, though, Dan, for a lot of people who've been watching this, there is still the question of how real is this? You know, there's been a lot of talk. There was the scathing report, but there's no specifics yet on what they're going to do, how big it'll be. You know, first, do you think something concrete and real is going to be coming out in the coming months, and what should people be looking for to figure that out?
Yeah, I think you will see something concrete. I think I was talking to Mayor Lorza this week after one of these public forums that that the commissioner's been holding about the scathing report, and you know, she comes in and just tells everybody just how bad things are, and I think people are kind of taken aback. They all ask questions. Kind of, there's a lot of yelling for an hour and a half at a lot of these forums, and I was talking to the mayor, and he seems pretty content with the idea of the state somehow stepping in. He believes there's a chance that they could find a way to either blow up the teacher's contract or at least make significant changes to it. That's always been kind of his push. And keep in mind, you know, the mayor keeps talking about how he's not going to be the obstructionist here. He's willing to take it on. I think that's a sign. If you read through that report, you know, it's just like us. Anyone who, if there's a report about us, we're going to want to know what does it say about me? What does it say about Ted? And I think in his case, he looked at the report, he said, what does it say about me? It says that I'm a micromanager. It says there's a little bit of political patronage involved. I'm going to step back and try to be that person, and he's so far willing to do it.
That's going to be something to watch closely. All right, let's turn to the State House, Ian, and you alluded to some of what we're going to talk about already when you mentioned what happened with the abortion bill, to the surprise of a lot of us. But you look back at the start of the year, Speaker Mattiello had nearly 24 Democrats in his caucus in revolt, not clear where they were going to go. Would he have enough votes for the budget? Fast forward to the end of the session, every House Democrat, progressive to conservative, votes for the budget. How did he do it? How did the Speaker kind of bring his caucus back together around him?
Well, I think if we spoke to the individual members, the so-called Reform Caucus, each member would have a slightly different reason explaining why they voted for the budget. But ultimately, the Speaker has so much power in Rhode Island that these one-time dissidents probably realize they're going to get more with honey than vinegar. They have more, even Teresa Tanzi, who has a very sharp relationship with the Speaker. Even she voted for the budget. And I think they just realized that there's more to be gained by siding with the Speaker on the budget than by putting their thumb in his eye in a public way. They can try and address their issues behind closed doors, but the Speaker is so powerful. I don't think his power was ever in doubt, even at the beginning of the session, even when about a third of the House was in open revolt. He had a strong hand then, and he has an even stronger hand now. I
remember one of the Speaker's aides saying to me over the winter, it's awfully cold in Siberia, as they strategize how to get some people back on their side. Dan, do you think, even as I listen to myself, I say, well, voting for the budget does not mean you're on board with the Speaker. I can hear some of the Reform reps yelling at their televisions for me characterizing it that way. How much do you see this coming back together, getting along as a marriage of convenience, or a real change in how people are feeling about each other in that very ideologically wide-ranging House Democratic caucus?
Yeah, I mean, they're going into an election year next year. All bets are off, right? You're going to start to see, I'm sure that the Speaker will sort of target some of the people who were maybe the most critical of him, whether they voted for his budget or not, whether they vote for the next budget or not. And I'm sure there's certainly, progressives are continuing to make waves. I'm sure they're going to try to, again, target some of the maybe more conservative folks, certainly in leadership. So I don't think that this is a long-term marriage. I think it's, we sat there on the Saturday morning when the House passed the budget, and what did the Speaker say? Everyone got something in this budget, but everybody also lost something in this budget. Usually that's a sign of a pretty good budget. Usually that's why folks are willing to vote for it. Doesn't mean it's going to last forever.
And of course, doesn't mean there's no controversy externally, because we had that big late-breaking scandal over the $1 million for the Cranston chiropractor, which got a lot of attention, and the Speaker backtracked rapidly off of that. He didn't think that was a position he could salvage. You pivot off that, Ian, and did a story kind of on, is the budget transparent enough? Can people understand it? What was your takeaway from the reporting you did on that?
Well, Ted, you and I were there when we were in a scrum with Speaker Mattiello. I gave him a couple of questions on whether the budget was transparent enough. He mostly wanted to defend the Cranston chiropractor. And finally, he said, people who understand the budget, which might be the people at this table and Sharon Reynolds Ferland and the House Fiscal Advisor and a couple of other people. But the fact is, the budget is a very complicated, detail-oriented process. It's very difficult for a layperson to pour through it and find details. That's our job to do that, to try and go through and find the hidden things that leaders might necessarily not want to see the light of day. So Republicans hope to make this into a campaign issue. Is it too complex for the average person? Maybe, maybe not. I think it could feed into the idea that a lot of people don't like the legislature and have kind of a suspicious view of it. So Republicans might make some hay with it, but I don't think we're going to see changes in the legislative process, at least in the short term.
Yeah, I think the question I got from a lot of people after we did those stories was, what else is in there that we don't realize and wouldn't expect? Which I said, we try to find it, but you never know where it's going to be hidden. So speaking of the budget, Governor Raimondo, I would say it was a somewhat rocky assembly session for her. Some of her biggest priorities didn't make it into the budget, most notably the adding Rick to the free tuition program. And while she got quite a bit of what she wanted on pre-K, she had to fight tooth and nail to get what she got in there. I saw her emerging from the Speaker's office 10 o'clock the night before the budget came out, still lobbying to get it in there. I mean, what do you think this is, Ian? Do you think, is she already a lame duck, doesn't have juice up there? What do you think is going on for the governor?
Well, as we know, Governor Raimondo is chair of the DGA, the Democratic Governors Association. You can almost imagine her talking to some of her Democratic colleagues who have Republican legislators they might lament how they have to fight with their Republicans. She has to fight with her own Democratic lawmakers. But if she thought her plurality in the election last year was going to translate into more juice at the State House, it didn't really work that way. I mean, she has generally got what she wanted in previous budgets. I think less so this year. I think her taking her time in deciding whether she was going to sign the budget is a reflection of that. And the Speaker has reasserted himself. He is the top dog at the State House. And so her power is something that's certainly held in check by the legislature.
All right, so we did a lot of looking back here. I want to look forward before we switch gears to Massachusetts. So, Dan, I'll go to you first. What will you be watching most closely and what will you be looking for in the next 6 months as we go through the second half of 2019?
Yeah, it's kind of the way we started, right? It's got to be education and Providence. So, it was surprising that they were even willing to take any steps to do anything. Now it's what are they going to do? And I think it's things to watch out for. How much is the mayor willing to kind of step aside and allow the state to actually step in, maybe appoint a superintendent, something like that? So I think that's a key one. And then what governance changes are going to be made? That's a huge part of this, right? The school board, it's entirely possible that 6 months from now there isn't a Providence school board, right? That's an actual thing that could happen. So I think we'll probably be here on January 1st, 2020, talking about how surprising was the last year, and it's going to be all education.
If I invite you, yes. And Ian, same question to you. What will you be watching most closely for the next half of the year?
I think public education is also the key issue to watch. Although the scathing report from Johns Hopkins was about Providence, we know this is a statewide issue. I first came to a reporter in Rhode Island in 1999. At the time, there was a lot of talk about the need to improve public education, how it was vital for the future of the state's economy. There have been scores of reports, and this Johns Hopkins one is just the latest, but the state hasn't gotten off the dime in making changes. So whether that actually happens now is a vital story for the state moving forward.
All right, Ian, Donnis, Dan McGowan, thanks for being with us. There's your briefing on Rhode Island, but don't go away. When we come back, Stephanie Murray and Peter Ubertaccio will take us through what we've been seeing and what we're going to be seeing in Massachusetts politics. Stick with us on Newsmakers. Ted Nisi. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Ted Nisi, filling in for Tim White, who is off this week. Well, as I said, we're taking stock of the political scene in southern New England halfway through the year. And after hearing about Rhode Island, we're now going to turn our attention to Massachusetts with two people who know the Bay State political scene very well. Stephanie Murray is a reporter for Politico Massachusetts. She rises bright and early every day to give us the Politico Massachusetts playbook, which you should subscribe to. And Peter Ubertaccio, he is the Dean of the School of Arts and Sciences at Stonehill College in Easton. Peter, Stephanie, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
So let's talk Mass. Peter, I'm going to go to you first. What do you think was the biggest surprise to you in the first half of the year in Massachusetts politics?
The biggest surprise for me was the failed rollout of the Seth Moulton for President campaign after really bursting on the political scene a few years back with a high-profile primary challenge and building a national profile. He really flubbed the transition to presidential candidate.
Did you think he had more? So you thought he had more? Because I admit I was a little skeptical myself. He's been a congressman for a hot minute. Now he's running for president. But you thought he might get a little more juice than he's had?
I think that he's capable of doing it, and the challenge to the speaker after a decisive win seemed lacking in strategy, and then the way in which he's decided to roll out this presidential campaign is problematic for him. It's pretty rare to launch a presidential campaign and simultaneously do a lot of damage to your standing in your home state. He's managed to do that and is probably going to have a primary challenger if he runs for re-election.
Yeah, quite a turn for him from when he won that seat a couple of years ago. Stephanie, same question to you. What to you has been the biggest surprise so far in 2019 in mass politics?
I'm going to take it a little bit more local, and I was really surprised at the beginning of the year. The whole conversation about new revenues and change on Beacon Hill was going to be about education and funding the state's education system. And as we head into July, it's all about transportation. After almost half a dozen MBTA derailments, a couple of reports that say that Boston has the worst rush hour traffic in the country, the conversation has totally shifted. And now the speaker is promising to have a debate about new revenue for transportation this fall. And so that whole conversation is just totally kind of taken a 180.
That's a great point, Stephanie, because that New Bedford, one of the cities we cover here, has been very much part of that discussion, even hinting at a lawsuit over education funding. And you're right, there was a lot of talk about it earlier in this year, but I know there was a new Pioneer Institute report on education, but yeah, it's not. So you feel the focus on Beacon Hill has definitely now shifted over to transportation.
Yeah, it doesn't have the same juice as the transportation conversation.
Well, let's stick with transportation and talk about in the context of Governor Baker. So we all know he's Mr. Popularity, won his re-election in a landslide last year, still approaching 70% approval in multiple surveys. Governor Raimondo looks longingly up 195, up I-95 to see if she could get the same numbers. But it seems like the frustration with transportation has reached more of a boiling point, even though it's been a discussion for a while with the Red Line derailment, with just congestion being such an issue all the time. And now you have a sort of related transportation scandal with the Registry of Motor Vehicles and not filing all those license suspensions. Peter, will anything ever bring down Governor Baker's numbers? Do you see these things as real threats, or do you think he has shown he has the skills to get through any crisis, including these?
Well, I think that he has shown that he has the skills, and he has the goodwill of both the people, the voters, and leading Democrats on Beacon Hill, who are very reluctant to attack him. And I think it's in part because they like Charlie Baker and members of his team personally, and they work well with him. I think voters have been willing to give him a very long leash, as have Democrats in the legislature, regarding the MBTA, because I think there's a recognition that the problems there have been building for so long that it's going to take a long time to get through it. The RMV is a very different kind of story, however, because that is an example of the kind of mismanagement that Charlie Baker, as a gubernatorial candidate, would have gone after his predecessor for. The mismanagement led to a very serious accident and fatalities. And so I think the RMV scandal is the kind of spark that can start to turn the conversation about his ability to manage state agencies.
Definitely for some people, it seemed like echoes of the second-term management issues that afflicted Governor Patrick when he was still in there. Stephanie, you talked to Governor Baker's team. You also talked to people who maybe sometimes are taking some shots at Governor Baker. I mean, how concerned do they feel this moment is a little more risky than others for them? How are they viewing, these multiple crises that have piled up, not to make a bad pun, but, have all come together right now?
Well, I can tell you that at the press conference where they were talking about how these documents were left in 53 bins and hadn't been reviewed, the feeling in the room really felt different. Everyone looked really serious, and it just felt like this different kind of, there wasn't an easy fix. I mean, they're bringing in an outside auditor, they're doing all these things, but they don't have all the answers right now. And instead of being able to say, this derailment happened, we're going to invest this $50 million, we're going to speed up the process. This RMV thing is really going to have to take a longer time to review and figure out, and people want answers now.
And one thing we should remind folks is, unlike in Rhode Island, where Governor Raimondo cannot run for a third term because of term limits, Massachusetts doesn't have that. So Charlie Baker is still a potential candidate for a third term in 3.5 years. I know it's far away. Do you think do you think he's taken seriously right now as at least an option he wants open?
Yeah, and he's already kind of quietly set up a team to do that. He's got folks from his previous 2 election efforts, and they're working together, and it's definitely something that he's looking at. He's not ruling it out, but I mean, all of these things kind of piling up on each other at this point is going to raise some questions, but we're still a few years away.
I have to think, Peter, you're a political scientist, harder to win a third term than a second term. Is that fair to say?
Very hard. It's unusual. Massachusetts doesn't have a history of governors winning consecutive third terms. Having said that, he is still an incredibly popular person. At this point, he is the leading candidate for governor in a few years. Now, if someone like Maura Healey or Joe Kennedy decided that they wanted to run, they would give him a very significant race. But his popularity is going to, if he continues to toy with running for re-election, it's going to put people on the defensive. They're going to wait to see, and it may end up being too late. So he might, despite the kind of turmoil he's going through, be in a very good position to win a third term.
All right, we've talked about the presidential race, but let's talk about someone it's going a little better for in the congressional delegation, which is Senator Elizabeth Warren. You know, if we were taping a few months ago, we might have all said, oh, this is not going so great for her. And now, in recent weeks, last month or so, her numbers are coming up. There's a lot of buzz that she's starting to pull it together. People are taking a second look, and they like what they see. Stephanie, you talk to her team, and you track her, especially in New Hampshire. What do you think has driven this resurgence in the Warren presidential bid in recent weeks?
You know, I think she's been able to really kind of boil down her message. If you think about Elizabeth Warren, I think we all think right now that she has a plan. So she's been able to telegraph that to voters. She's drawing really big crowds everywhere she goes: Nevada, California, Chicago, New Hampshire. So she's been able to kind of weather the rocky start that she had in January. She kind of emerged on top from the debate that she was in. And I mean, who knows if it'll stay, but right now she's really kind of at the top of the field. I saw an Iowa poll where she was actually leading, which probably would have surprised people in January.
Yeah, not too long ago. Peter, handicap it for us. How do you think her prospects are to actually be the nominee right now?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's a long road to the nomination, and so, you know, I always tell my students, be very careful about people who try to handicap way too early. So
we'll make you do that on television now.
I think, you know, she's always been in a very good position because she has name recognition. She has the ability to raise a significant amount of money. She has put together a very smart team of people, and she's well organized in the early states. And so, you know, any candidate who can do that is in a very good position to see this through. Anything and everything will happen between now and a year from now. But I do think that she's always been a top-tier candidate. There was some questions, I think, at the way in which they tried to deal with her ancestry. I think, and many others think that they handled that poorly, but they rebounded from that. And I think that because of all those other factors, money, name recognition, organization, she's able to bounce back from an error that you're going to make in a presidential campaign when you're doing it for the first time. She's a very smart and skillful person as well. And so she brings all the kinds of things to a presidential campaign that would lead to great success.
Let's talk about another prominent politician, which is Congressman Joe Kennedy. He was on with us just last week. He announced that he is now in support of an impeachment inquiry for President Trump, which we did not know was coming at the time. He was pretty emphatic with us. He barely considered running for president in 2020, even if he kicked the tires. But he definitely left the door open for running for Senate if Elizabeth Warren is elected to the White House. What do you see right now, Stephanie, is kind of his, you know, he was super quiet. I remember his first term, and he didn't want to do a lot of interviews, didn't want to be national. He clearly is now much more comfortable as a national figure. What do you see as his kind of long-term plan and his prospects?
It's a great question, and it's a great point that he is going a lot more national. I mean, he was at the border last week, kind of sounding the alarm on those facilities in Texas. He's always out there speaking. He's a close ally with Nancy Pelosi, and so I think that the challenge for him is, as Democratic voters kind of move away from the establishment and they're kind of moving further left, they're looking for newer candidates. Kind of straddling that line as a young and kind of newer congressman is going to be the challenge for him. But I mean, he's really popular. He's really well liked.
Yeah, he's spending a lot of time on transgender rights, for example, as something that's sort of a new thing that's getting a lot of attention on the left. What do you think, Peter? What do you see as kind of the long-term outlet for him? He's still only in his 30s.
Well, he's got plenty of time, and he doesn't seem to be in a hurry, and I think that has helped him. You know, he decided early in his term in Congress to make a name for himself as opposed to allowing his famous name to dictate the way people view him and think of him. He has name recognition. He has a lot of goodwill in Congress and among politicos in Massachusetts. He can raise money, and he's got a very smart and sharp team around him. So I fully expect that if he chooses to, he will run for Senate, because there will be, at some point, a Senate seat opening up in Massachusetts, and he's fairly young. And he'll run a very good and aggressive campaign.
I want to leave time for a final question, so I'll ask you briefly, 30 seconds, Stephanie. You had an interesting one about Senator Markey, who's up for re-election next year. What's he looking at right now?
Well, he's looking at two primary challengers. Shannon Liss-Riordan is a labor attorney who's already announced, and Steve Pemberton, who is an inspirational speaker and a corporate executive. He's in the exploratory phase. And there's some speculation that a bigger name like Boston Mayor Marty Walsh, Attorney General Maura Healey, or even Joe Kennedy could get in. And if that happens, I mean, he'd be looking at a lot tougher race. His approval ratings aren't that high. His name recognition is not that high. And he's not the only kind of older white incumbent who's facing a primary challenge in Massachusetts. Kennedy's got one. Stephen Lynch has already got one. And so that's kind of what I'm watching, is all of these primary challengers emerging after Ayanna Presley's win.
So that's what Stephanie will be watching next few 30 seconds. What will you be watching the next 6 months in mass politics?
I'm going to be really watching very closely how the RMV issue impacts the governor and his administration, and whether it derails his ability to run for a third term.
All right, Peter Ubertaccio, Stephanie Murray, giving us what we need to know about Massachusetts politics as we head into the back half of the year. Thank you both for joining me, and thank you, Ian Donnis and Dan McGowan, for being with us on the first half, breaking down Rhode Island politics. Remember, if you missed any of the show or any other episode, you can catch them all on WPRI.com. You can also subscribe to our podcast on iTunes. Tim White will be back with me next week here on Newsmakers. We'll see you then.